All right, guys, this is part three. I'm going to try to be quick about this. It's going to be tough. There's a good chance I might have to do a part four with this unit just because each part is just distinctively different. So we'll see how it goes. Here we go. All right, Spanish American War, rebellion in Cuba. So the Spanish American War, break that down. Obviously, Spain on one side, America on the other, and the fight is going to be in Cuba. So it's not going to be on American soil per se. It's going to be right near America, though, because Cuba and Florida aren't too far from one another. If you have to, go full screen, obviously, so that you can see this a little bit better. And here we go. So use my pen. There we go. All right, so rebellion in Cuba. All right, while the U.S. was expanding, Spain, once the holder of a great empire in the Americas. All right, you should know that now by all the countries, Mexico down, all speak Spanish except for Portuguese being spoken in Brazil. So that shows you right there that Spain once ruled pretty much all of those areas. Now, Spain, again, once the holder of the great empire in the Americas, from Mexico down, was shrinking. Most Spanish holdings had declared independence, and those remaining were eager to be free of Spanish rule. The Spain were always notoriously known for being very tough on the colonies, on the smaller countries that they ruled. In 1895, Cuban revolutionary Jose Marti returned from exile. I remember exiles kicking him out, to lead the fight for Cuban independence. All right, he was kicked out due to the fact that he was trying to start Cuban independence. He comes back and fights for it even more. All right, this worried many in the U.S. who were concerned about the trade with Cuba and its islands' proximity to Florida. So we don't like this. As the United States of America, we don't like the idea of Cuba getting its own independence. Why? Because we kind of want Cuba to be friends with us so we can trade with them constantly. And with the Spanish being there, it was pretty easy. However, neither President Cleveland at the time, all right, Grover Cleveland, who was in his second term at the time, nor his successor, President William McKinley, wanted to interfere. So far we've got Spain being pretty bad in Cuba. We don't want Cuba to be independent and not like us, not be friends with us, not trade with us. And we're really just kind of tired of Spain in itself. So we're going to get involved, okay, basically. We're not getting involved with President Cleveland. We're not getting involved with President McKinley yet. All right, we'll talk about why. All right, so yellow journalism. What is yellow journalism? Well, it's pretty simple. It kind of was the color yellow. It had these weird pictures on it, kind of looked like outdated newspaper, sort of. Yellow journalism. The fighting in Cuba became very violent, and Spanish troops treated Cuban prisoners terribly. The American public was shocked, but shock sold newspapers. All right, again, listen to this. They were shocked, but shock is what sells newspapers. When you watch the news, again, think about it. When a title for anything is like crazy out there, when you're in the supermarket and you look over in a magazine, it says Kim Kardashian married to an alien. When you see things like that, you go, well, that sounds stupid, but I feel like I got to read it. All right, it's clickbait is what it is. Okay, today we have a lot of that where you see an ad for something on social media and you're just like, oh wow, crazy. That sounds off. That some weird title for something. Click, and then boom, 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 boom. You got a virus just because it's clickbait. All right. In a tactic known as yellow journalism, these were newspapers, right, called yellow journalism. All right. Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst exaggerated and sensationalized a story, stirring up public fury. All right. They were in competition with one another, and scandals obviously sold well. So the more scandalous something sounds, the more interested and more readers you're going to get. So yellow journalism, again, is sensationalized. It is scandalous. It's not always true journalism. All right, remember the Maine. All right, again, remember the Maine. Down with Spain is essentially the quote that I want you to remember here. So remember the Maine, down with Spain. All right, so what is the Maine? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. William McKinley wished to avoid war. However, rioting in Havana, which is Cuba's capital, put Americans in the area of danger. McKinley sent the ship, the USS Maine, to Havana in January of 1898 to protect them. All right, with no warning, the ship exploded on February 15th. Although evidence later suggested that it was just an accident, Spain was blamed. Get it? Spain was blamed. And the quote, "Remember the Maine," became a rallying cry for people who wanted war. All right, so obviously, crazy accident. We think it was one of the boilers in the ship that kind of exploded. But when you explode near an enemy, it's almost always the enemy's fault. Okay, and that's kind of how that is. So anytime there's an accident, and all right, let's just say, for instance, you go to a party and somebody new is at the party, you don't know them, and as soon as they show up, everybody gets sick at the party. You kind of have to point fingers a little bit. So it's easier to point fingers than to just say, oh, it was an accident. So far, again, remember the Maine. On April 20th, Congress, okay, our government, got together and recognized Cuban independence and demanded that Spanish troops leave the island. In the Teller Amendment, the U.S. stated that it had no interest in controlling Cuba. On April 25th, 1898, Cuba declared war on Spain, and the Spanish-American War had finally began. All right, so again, remember the Maine, down with Spain. That was the whole rallying cry there. I'm going to go back up to the top a little bit here. All right, Dewey. So Dewey in the Philippines. All right, so not only are we fighting in the Spanish in Cuba, we're also in the Philippines because, again, we want to expand our empire. The Philippines were another holding of Spanish Empire, and like the Cubans, the Filipinos revolted in the 1890s when Commodore George Dewey, all right, Commodore is just another name for like saying captain, led an American fleet on the Philippines, to the Philippines on April 30th, 1898. He had the support of the people there. On May 1st, in the first battle of the Spanish-American War, Dewey destroyed the Spanish ships in Manila, again, capital of the Philippines, harbor, and then with the help of the Filipino rebels, all right, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, took control of the city. All right, the Rough Riders, another group here, fighting in the Caribbean. Rough Riders is going to be led by a guy named Teddy Roosevelt. We'll talk about him. He's super important. I actually really enjoy Teddy Roosevelt. Although the Navy did much of the fighting, the Army also played a role in the Spanish-American War. Many volunteers signed up to fight, including the first U.S. volunteer cavalry. All right, men fighting a diverse regiment of cowboys, students, as in student athletes, and other organized by Theodore Teddy Roosevelt that became known as the Rough Riders. On July 1st, 1898, the Rough Riders captured the hills around Santiago, Cuba. They helped Americans win the Battle of San Juan Hill. This will be a really easy, they nicknamed this a splendid little war. And one of the reasons why is because America is pretty successful. Obviously the Spanish-American War starts with an accident. I remember the Maine down with Spain. All right, Commodore Dewey pretty much helps the Filipinos take over the Philippines from the Spanish, and the Rough Riders and obviously the Navy take over places like San Juan Hill near Havana, and then obviously, Santiago there as well. The Treaty of Paris, again. So there's a couple different Treaty of Parises. Okay, that's just what they called it. Okay, so you have the Treaty of Paris, 1783. And you have another treaty here of Paris as well. And again, it's the same concept. That's where they went to talk about these things. On August 12th, only a few months after the fighting had begun, an armistice was declared. Armistice is another word for saying temporary peace. Okay, so a peace treaty, all right, if you have peace for a time period, all right, usually it's a truce, like we're good, right? Like we're good, all right? In this case, it's a truce for a time period. It's a peace for a time period, armistice, all right? The Spanish Empire was over, and the fighting had cost very few American lives. In fact, many more Americans died of tropical disease than the actual battle wounds themselves. In 1898, Treaty of Paris signed on December 10th. Spain ceded control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. Pretty important there. I'm going to highlight it real quick. So again, what are the things that the United States technically win? All right, they win control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. We're not going to bother with Cuba as much. We're going to let Cuba kind of run itself, but we do want Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines as territories after the war. Again, think about this. Remember, 1763. All right, you have the Treaty of Paris, which ended the 7 Years' War, also known as the French-American War. In 1783, another 20 years later, you have the Treaty of Paris, which ends the Revolutionary War. And then in 1898, okay, almost 100 years, well, a little bit more than 100 years later, all right, ended the Spanish-American War, all known as the Treaty of Paris, all three of them, okay? All right, expansionism. This will be my last part here. So expansionism expands, okay? So it's the idea that we as America want to create an empire here. All right, once the Spanish left, Americans needed to decide what to do with the new lands. All right, many, including the founders of the Anti-Imperialist League, thought that the island should be given their independence. All right, to do otherwise would be, anathema, sorry. I don't know why I say that word. Something hated, okay? I don't know if I'm saying that right. I can't remember. All right, to American democratic ideals and portray America's own history fighting for independence from British colonialism. All right, we're known as the land of freedom, so we like to fight for people and getting their freedoms. Others argued that the colonies would provide U.S. with markets, resources, naval stopovers, and places that spread those democratic ideals. Although each island nation was treated differently, in the end, imperialist reasoning prevailed. So what does this all mean? Well, it's pretty simple. Okay? We cared more about making money off of these little island nations and treating them like territories than we did about independence. So money will be the absolute convincing checkmark. Yes, we all want to make money. All right, we all want to make America as big as possible, as strong as possible. And so we don't care if we have to exploit smaller little nations. Puerto Rico and Guam became territories, all right, meaning that they would remain under U.S. control. And in 1917, Puerto Ricans gained citizenship. So now if you live in Puerto Rico, you are a U.S. citizen, okay? You get the vote, you get the whole thing, okay? All right, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. Cuba became an American protectorate. All right, what does that mean? Well, it's pretty simple. We will protect Cuba, all right, at this time period, and it does end eventually. An independent country with American oversight, as in we're kind of like the big brother. When Cuba rewrote its constitution in 1901, the Platt Amendment specified that the U.S. still had the right to make decisions for the Cuban government and that the U.S. could maintain a military presence at Guantanamo Bay. Still have that presence there. That's where we keep terrorists. It's our terrorist prison, essentially. All right, protectorate, again, a country that is protected and controlled by another more powerful country. All right, last thing here. Here we go. All right, the Philippines became an American colony, all right, for a time period, prompting Aguinaldo to lead another fight for independence. So we will end up fighting against the Filipinos, or the Filipinos will end up fighting against us. And the second struggle for the Philippines was much more challenging for the U.S., but the U.S. managed to capture Aguinaldo in 1901. And in 1946, the Philippines became independent. So in 1946, the Philippines became independent by allowing the U.S. to retain a military base or bases there in their country. So let's think about it. Every time America does control a place, whether it's a protectorate or not, we tend to put a military basis there. Same thing that we did with the Philippines. And then obviously sometimes we don't even do that. We just want the money. Okay? that's it. That's part 3. I'm going to stop here, and then part 4 will be following, and it will have to do with a man and his plan, more progressivism. The focus is on Teddy Roosevelt.